I'm going to call the meeting to order. I have a few announcements, and then I don't know if your Budget Committee Chair would also like to officially call the Budget Committee to order, but we can do both of those. But before we start, I'll ask everybody to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. A little out of order here, but I'd like to call the City Council meeting of January 18th, 2023 to order. And Chair, do you want to call the Budget Committee meeting to order? It was on Zoom a second ago.
It's Chair Hart still on.
Hi. There we go. Yes, let's call the Budget Committee hearing to order. Sorry about that.
No worries. So I did just want to make a clarifying point. Council President Garvin and I have initiated doing these meetings as an opportunity for public engagement and really focused on transparency as well, so that we are providing an opportunity in many formats for the public to hear the direction the council's going in terms of how to use our remaining taxing authority. And of course, those decisions are driven by the community members. So in our planning of this, we may have miscommunicated a little bit when public comment is going to be received. Tonight, our intention is to receive our polling data and to have discussion. And at the special called meeting next Tuesday at 5:30 p.m., that is our intent at the time when we will take public comment before deliberations. On that note, I understand that there's been a lot of effort on the part of our fire chief, our council president, fire leadership, union leadership as well, to go out and discuss this fire district, and people may have been told we were taking public comment tonight. And so with that in mind, if we make our way through the council and budget committee discussions and we have time before our scheduled end at 8 o'clock, we will open up for additional public comment tonight, but really the intent and my preference would be that we'll take all the public comment at the same time, which would be at the special called meeting at 5:30 p.m. on the 24th. So with that out of the way, so to speak, we will begin our fire district consolidation and tax rate survey discussion. Chief, would you like to take us into that?
Well, thank you, Mayor and Budget Committee members. As a result of the 4 years of work that's been done through consolidation efforts and studies, we've come to the point with county commissioners' support to move the fire district consolidation to a vote, and we're still working through some administrative processes on that. But as part of the feasibility statements and studies that were done in the financial statements, the potential for the fire district vote to occur, there will be a ballot occurring in May, and a ballot measure on May. And as a result of that, if it is successful, there will be allocated or legally allowed or revenues or tax dollars that the city will retain, the estimated $1.50 that is currently used by the fire department. And we've worked with consultant JL of Nelson Incorporated, I believe it is. I apologize, JL, if I misspoke your title or your company's name. But we worked with JL's company on polling to try and determine the citizens' taste on both follow-up to the district, whether or not they were still interested based on some of the economic change that occurred since our last polling, and then also how interested they were, what their flavor for with the remaining polling tax dollars, what that would look like, and if there was support or lack of support, or what the issues that would, public issues that would drive that decision at an election. And JL is here this evening to make a presentation on the formal official polling process, and he'll speak to that. And I'll leave it with that.
I heard a little bit. Are you kicking it over to me?
We can hear you, JL.
Yes,
You
we're handing it over to you, sir.
Thank you. All right. I could hear you just in fits and spurts, so I wasn't quite sure if that was a segue to me. I'm going to share with you just a tight PowerPoint we put together that I think captures the information succinctly, and I think gives you some clear data points on how to move forward. And I'll start by saying we conducted this poll by means of telephone and an online panel. We talked to, in this case, 330 respondents in the city of McMinnville. This is consistent with the 330 we talked to in the larger proposed fire district area in April of last year. So we felt that this was a apples to apples comparison. Just in terms of demographics, I think we're about 52% female, probably 38% Democrat, 34 Republican, the balance non-affiliated. We were probably about 50% high propensity voters, which is we call the 404. Those are the people we know are going to show up to vote on this measure, and that's going to be heavily oriented around your 60 plus age demographic. So we collected that data, I believe, on Tuesday, January 3rd through Friday of January 6th, just earlier this month. So this is very fresh data. The objectives of the survey, keep in mind we conducted a very comprehensive, what I could call a benchmark survey for the fire districts back in April, where we really explored voter sentiment on the arguments around the merger of the two fire districts. We found at that time that the arguments around the merger were very compelling. The features of the merger were very compelling, and generally we thought, or we concluded that all things being equal, that was likely to be a successful ballot endeavor. But I know that this is really kind of a two-pronged issue. You've got the issue of the merger, and then you've got this issue that runs side by side with it, which is what happens to the city's unexpended taxing authority, the taxing authority that comes free. And that's the part that isn't evident at first blush to voters, but yet it's going to factor into their decision making. People are going to talk. They're going to understand the moving parts here, and this is a part that you have to account for. And I think we demonstrate that pretty clearly here as we go through some of the slides. So the objectives for this survey were to account for the timing of the city re-implementing its taxing authority. That would be basically taken off the rolls should the fire districts merge, and also the items that your residents would like to see that money spent on. And so this was a relatively tight survey. It was only 8 or 9 minutes, and I think we got some of the information we needed here for you to make an informed decision. So what we were doing with this survey is we updated our understanding of voter support for the merger. We updated our understanding of voter support with the merger with the additional understanding that there would now be taxing authority that comes free for the city, and the city would have to make some decisions there. And then to identify community preferences for timing of engaging or re-implementing that taxing authority, and then identify some community preferences for the investment options that you might have with those monies. We typically start surveys with I would say some introductory questions that deal with perceptions of where they live, where the respondents live. And these are important, not just because they help people get into the survey taking mood, if you will, but they're important because they really set a frame for how people perceive the actions of the city, whether they give the city the benefit of the doubt, whether there is some inherent trust that people have that these proposals in front of them have been vetted well and really contribute to quality of life. So the quality of life numbers really are astoundingly high. 84% of residents are satisfied with their quality of life in McMinnville. It's an extraordinarily high number. The number is even higher for your higher propensity voters. It's closer to 9 out of 10. So those numbers are, again, very uncommon. Don't see those a lot, but very, very strong and good feelings about quality of life in McMinnville with the residents that we surveyed. Operations and performance of city government. 56% of residents rate the operation and performance as excellent or pretty good. Again, I consider this a high number in the mid to high 50s. Again, that's a relatively uncommon finding. That number is replicated by your higher propensity voters, so that's a good thing. That is a good number, and I think that's a strong basis. Value for the taxes paid. This, again, a very strong number. Don't see these numbers every day on surveys like this. So about 2/3 of your respondents believe they receive good value from the city for what they pay in taxes. That number increases with your higher propensity voters. It's over 70% with your high propensity voters. And then trust in the city to make wise use of tax dollars, both with your respondents writ large and among your high propensity voters. That number approaches 50%. There's about a 20% delta between high trust and low trust. Again, those are strong numbers. I know 50 doesn't look as good as the others we've just seen, but I can tell you, just having done this for a lot of municipalities, local governments, those are pretty strong numbers. And so, again, all of those speak to people perceiving good quality of life. Your respondents want to keep that quality of life going. There's a high degree of faith in city government, and all of that is good. Those were good numbers. So we asked the question again about and this question was nothing more than talking about the features and benefits of the merger. And this was, in essence, the same question that we asked on our initial ballot with fire district respondents of that survey back in April, so about 8 months ago. And the responses from today track pretty consistently with the responses we got 8 months ago. And that is, within City of McMinnville voters, you've got about 60% support for the merger as we described it. And again, this was the initial question. It left to the side anything related to the taxing authority that would come free, all of that. This was just a simple question about the merger, and it's likely an analog to the question that your voter would see on the ballot. So the 66% support that we saw in April, it dipped a little bit, but not much. It's still strong at 60%. That the opposition did tick up. Our opposition in April was under 20. Now it was about 27, and your number of undecideds did go down a little bit. So I would say it really it tracked pretty well. This could very just be people feeling less secure about their financial situation. There's a lot of factors that go into the support and opposition that have nothing to do with people's feelings about the city or people's feelings about the merger. It sometimes is a function about how do I feel about my personal finances. So there's probably some of that baked in, but still I would consider 60% to be a pretty strong number in terms of support for the merger. Now, this is where it gets interesting because this is where we asked the question 3 times, and we introduce a new piece of information with each subsequent asking of the question. And so on this question, we kind of peeled back one layer of the onion, and this, I think, illustrates your challenge with this measure. And that is, we gave voters information that the merger would free up about $1.50 per thousand in assessed value and taxing authority, or about $4.8 million that the city would in fact retain. And so you see that the measure, support for the measure goes from about 60% to just over 47%. So it drops about 12.5 points. Now, that does not mean that people automatically had a knee-jerk opposition to that. That is not what happened. Those that previously supported were less sure, and so they sort of park in the not sure or unsure category. So you see that your support level goes from basically 60 to 48. Not much change in the opposition vote. What you get a spike in the number of people who were unsure when presented with this new information. And I think one of the things that gives me a little caution is your higher propensity voters, your 404s. Those numbers moved a little more dramatically. It moved down to 43%. So there was just something to keep in mind. This is going to be a factor. You're going to have to develop strategies around it because it does influence people's thinking on this measure. And then finally, we asked this question a 3rd time with yet one little added piece of information, and that is that the city is looking for options to keep the tax rate the same, the city tax rate the same. In other words, people are going to end up paying the whole $2 for the fire district proposal. There's not going to be any, in essence, tax savings on the back end because the city is going to explore spending the unallocated taxing authority and looking at those options. So the piece of information we give here is that the city is looking at options to keep its city tax rate the same and use that taxing authority to address city issues. And the numbers really don't change from the 2nd time we asked the question to the 3rd time we asked the question. The number dips a little, but not statistically significant. It goes from 47.5% support to 46%. The opposition drops a little bit, and what happens is your undecided moves up even more. So I think that this is a clear indicator that you're going to have to develop strategies around this piece for the measure because it is giving people pause, and it needs to be factored in and needs to be accounted for. And so this is just a graphical representation. You've got the April 2022 survey, and just shows you, okay, now you go on to your initial support for this January survey, and then your subsequent support when we ask the question additional times. You see it's a downward trajectory. It just gives that sort of illustration here so you can visualize it. So we asked a handful of questions with respect to timeline and re-exercising the city's $1.50 taxing authority. And I think you've got some pretty clear data points that emerged. I'll start with the least popular option, which was immediate use. And so basically what we asked is, would you be more likely to support the measure or less likely to support the measure if you knew the city would either immediately start to re-exercise the taxing authority, wait 1 year, wait 2 years, or engage in a gradual implementation over 3 years. And so the least popular option, it was a split, was the immediate use. Your second least popular option was waiting 2 years. Where you started to get some consensus was that the council should consider waiting 1 year and engage in a process where there's gradual implementation over time. And so you see on those two, the positive responses really started to pop, and you started to develop more consensus around those options. And again, we randomized these, so they weren't asked in any particular sequence. I think you can have confidence that there are clear preferences that emerged here with the responses to these questions. So gradual implementation and looking at a 1 year, basically a 1 year pause or a 1 year period of time where you consider options. I added this slide, like I told the team this morning, what I was really hoping for is parsing into the data those that were undecided, whether there were any clear indications that what I was looking for is you've got that 20 some odd % that are undecided, and you really want to get into the process of winning them back over. And was there anything in here that was just popped more than the others? One thing I noticed is that all the subgroups kind of moved in tandem. They all kind of worked together. I wish I could say, this subgroup really worked better than another subgroup. They all just kind of moved, together through this process. I think would say here the undecideds were clearly more favorable toward a gradual implementation scheme. Other than that, I didn't get, I would say, great data out of the undecideds here, other than the immediate use and waiting 2 years did not seem to be popular options. I think it was Q13. We asked, it was more of a process issue as opposed to a timeline, but we folded it into the timeline battery of questions. And that is, would you be more likely or less likely to support the measure if you knew the city would use citizen feedback to identify funding priorities? And this obviously was clearly popular. You had about 54% that were more likely, knowing that the city would engage in a process to take citizen and resident feedback for spending priorities and timelines. So I put this one and held it out separate because it was slightly different than the other timeline questions, but it was also a clear winner, and there was a clear consensus that really developed around projecting that the city was going to place a premium and a value on citizen input over a period of time before it started to re-exercise that taxing authority. And then finally, we asked a priorities question. Again, these were randomized responses, and we asked for people to rate a priority on a 1 to 4 scale, with 1 and 2 being low priorities, 3 and 4 being high priorities. If with this taxing authority that would be re-exercised, would you rather that money be spent on paying down debt? Would you rather the money be spent on deferred maintenance of city equipment and facilities? Or whether the respondent would rather see that money used for maintenance of existing staffing and programs and services? And then we listed out things like parks, police, and public works. That is clearly the preference. It just pops out to the eye. You've got about 3/4 of your respondents who placed a higher priority on the maintenance of existing staffing and services. And so I think that there was really clear separation on that question in terms of preferences for respondents. And that's where we ended it. So I think, just in summary, I think there were some clear data points that suggested a pathway for the city on timing of exercising that authority, and also in terms of priorities for how that money might be spent. And I will wrap it there, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. We appreciate the presentation. Would anybody, well, I'm going to start with a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to the Budget Committee and Council. I have a question that's actually just about your understanding your data a little more. Could you talk a little bit more about the methodology? You mentioned that the questions were randomized. I'm wondering if you can address how you got your population sampling, and if this level of sampling is fairly normal when you're doing polling such as this.
Sure. And so our sampling is drawn off of voter databases. And so, so within the city of McMinnville, so we will get a voter file that is randomized, and we do what's called a random within a random. And so we will pull a random data file with a random assortment of landlines, cell phones, email addresses. We will administer the phone side of the survey, and then I will supplement with an online panel to that randomized sample of phones and email. And in this case, the phones, I would say, were about 2/3, and the online was probably about 1/3 of the sample. And then we aggregate that for the 330 sample. For me, in a smaller community like McMinnville, I think it's more cost effective. I mean, obviously, if you wanted to pay us, $25,000 to run a survey, we would gladly get you a sample size that got you, 4% margin of error, because you're talking about a sample size that is 500 respondents, and that's going to take a lot of time. It's going to annoy the community because you're calling everybody a lot to be able to get that response. I've always found that for I'd say moderate sized communities, the ideal and most cost effective option is somewhere between a 5% margin of error and a 5.5% margin of error, which is really the difference of a 300 sample size to about a 375 sample size. And so it's somewhere in that range, I think, is always the most cost-effective sweet spot for resource-constrained local governments. And so we were right there in the middle. A 330 response, 330 respondents, which gets you a margin of error of about 5.4%, which is, I would say, very normal.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're just going to go around the table to start, give everybody an opportunity to get their questions and comments. Councillor Menke, would you like to begin? Okay. Commissioner Ferry, Harmon Ferry?
Don't know that this is a question, but I wonder if the outcome would have been different if we'd done it in the other order. If we'd said, here are some priorities for the city of McMinnville, and the community is allowed to weigh in on it. Now, how do you feel about us using some of the dollars? I just wonder if asking first how you feel about the dollars being used and then later kind of putting in what they could be used for might have changed the outcome.
I think that you're probably right, but I would also say I think that would probably introduce some bias into the questionnaire. I take great pains, and I think most people who do this professionally do take great pains to try to remove bias from the questions, and that includes even the sequencing of the questions, because how you sequence questions sometimes can move the numbers and give you false impressions. So I don't doubt for a second that you're probably right, but I would also say I don't know that I would have confidence in those numbers. I do have a lot of confidence in how this was laid out, because I think it's, I thought it was very free of those biasing pieces.
Thank you. Committee Member Maxfield?
I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you. Committee Member Cunningham?
I too don't have any other questions at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Geary? Council President Garvin?
I don't have any questions at this time.
Councillor Chenoweth?
I'm just curious, in a May election, I would be apt to kind of ignore the data for 1 of 4 and 2 of 4 and focus on 3 of 4 and 4 of 4. Would that be an accurate way to go about this?
On a May primary, I would probably I would probably implement a tighter voter screen that was more, you're right, that was more reflective of a higher propensity voting population. And that's why you'll see on these on these surveys, we probably tend, there's a couple things you're going to notice. One, it's going to skew toward your higher age brackets. It just is, because that's going to be your 4-4 voter that's going to show up on a September special, a May primary, a November off year. And so I agree with you totally that I would really focus on your 3 of 4 and 4 of 4. With respect to a May election, I'm very biased personally, because I would never choose any election other than a May election for various reasons. But to your point, yes, I would more closely track with your 3 of 4 and 4 of 4s on these surveys, knowing that you are going to do a May election. So if you did a benchmark survey that did message testing and all that kind of thing, you know, in the run-up, I would probably implement a tighter voter screen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peralta. Committee Member Mason?
No.
All right, we're going to go to Zoom. Chair Hart.
No questions.
Thank you. Councillor Payne?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Committee Member Ernst?
No questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some redundancy in the room and on the screen, so I'm just... I think we've got everybody. Councillor Chenoweth?
Just really quickly, I'm sure this is true, but just for clarification, this is City McMinnville proper. This does not include rural, correct?
Yes.
Correct. Our first survey included those in the rural fire protection district. This survey was just McMinnville.
Thank you. Okay, well, we can open this up for general discussion now. I'll just look around the room for anybody that would like to dive in. I'm shocked.
So, Mayor, this is Jerry. I was trying to hold my electric hand up, but I couldn't find the right spot. I do have some comments. I am 68 years old. It's hard for me to believe at times, but except when I look in the mirror, then I realize it. So, and I'm pretty sure that I'm one of the high propensity voters. And what I think of when I think of the issue of how I would vote on creating a fire district, and I'm in favor of it, but my thought process is really twofold. Will this result in as good or better fire protection ambulance service in the city of McMinnville? And will the city of McMinnville use any additional funds that will be available to it in a wise way? So that's what this one particular high propensity voter cares about. And I think when we are discussing it, I would almost like you to get rid of the word messaging, because I think messaging indicates almost when you use the term, I'm going to message the message this way, it almost is an insult to the listener, because what you want to do, you got to be accurate, you got to be truthful, and you got to be upfront, so that people do understand that it's going to cost them some more money. And if it's going to cost you some more money, how will that benefit both the individual, but a lot of us older high propensity voters really care, how will it benefit the city and other people that live here in this community? So those are the from my perspective, those are the things that really need to be emphasized when, this discussion is going out into the community. So
Thank you,
that's
committee.
my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Chair Hart. I'm going to, yes, I'll hand this over to you. I want to, first of all, on your second question, that is the reason we are holding these work sessions right now. The number one question in the packet is why should the city spend these what should the city send these unrestricted resources on, and how should they be prioritized? So that's my shock at not having conversation, because in the packet, it goes on to talk about a number of different options of the way in which the city and through the Budget Committee could prioritize that spending. And so this is one of most realistically 2 meetings we're holding specifically to have that conversation. So as a Budget Committee member, I really urge you to go down to the bottom of your packet and the staff report that was prepared, look at the list of options that are available. I'm urging everybody to do this right now, to look at the list of options that were discussed in ways in which this money could be spent. In answer to the first part of your question, the short answer is yes, but there are 3 people in the room who have been doing a tremendous job at going out into the public and talking to community groups like Lions Club, Rotary, and others. We're hosting greeters this week. And so I think I have the specificity about our increased capacity, but I do want to ask either our Council President Garvin, our Fire Chief, or our Union President Todd Godfrey to answer those. So we're going to do that, but Councilor Menke had something she wanted to add first.
Was there any consideration in this overall polling about the difficulty of actually voting for this option? There's 3 things you're going to have to vote on, is my understanding. And I'm just a little concerned about how to clarify that more than anything else. Make it really clear, if people do want this, they vote for it correctly.
Okay, so let's put a pin in that. My apologies, I thought you were responding to the question in front of us. So, do any of you 3 gentlemen you want me to pick, or Council President, your mic?
I have the PowerPoint up. I can run off that if you would like.
Yeah, you're welcome to share your screen. And then before I answer, I just asked Jerry to repeat his question. I was getting multiple questions at the same time. So.
Oh, great. So essentially the question is, will this maintain the status quo or improve fire service delivery to McMinnville residents? And so all of the points that we have to talk about how that can play out is essentially what I'm looking for in that answer. And then we will come back to you, Councilor Menke, for your questions. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor. In answer to your questions, Chair Hart, we have identified significant service gaps in our feasibility studies with our current service levels with the fire department and EMS services. We have response time delays with our initial engine going out the door because we cross-staff. So as an engine is deployed to go to a fire, because we don't have enough staff on duty, it has to wait to get the appropriate amount of staff on board, and that creates a 60 to 90-second delay in getting the engine out the door to fire calls, which is a significant delay as far as response time standards are. We also don't have enough EMS staffing to support the numbers of EMS calls, as well as not a second staffed engine. It takes about 13 to 15 minutes to get 12 to 15 minutes to get a volunteer engine out the door. So if we have a secondary call where a second engine is required, we don't have that capacity. We have 700 times a year we're using partner agency ambulance services to come in and provide ambulance service for us because of our call volume for EMS and our staffing levels are not capable of funding staffing to support the EMS demand for the system. We have facilities, as you've heard time and time again. Recurring maintenance has been an issue and has not occurred on the fire station. We also have the need to deploy additional facilities, which this measure would allow us to find funding mechanisms to purchase property and plan for future substations for the new district, which would allow us to, currently our current station is at full capacity. So as we grow, we will need substations, and all of those come into play with the additional tax revenues that we would get going from $1.50 to 2, as well as the rural district dollars coming in from 97 cents to 2. So the overall increase in taxing authority of the new district would set us up in a sustainable model where we wouldn't have to be coming back in 5 years for levies for fire protection and EMS services.
And do you want to hit those couple expected points of number of new substation?
Yeah, I can do that.
The exact data?
Yeah, so Jerry, the rural fire board and their savings account that they are allocating to this new fire district is set aside for rural increased fire response, and through that will be 2 new substations, should be under construction around the 5-year mark. And with us having additional rural substations, the city voter is also going to have increased response times, because right now all of our apparatus deploy out of the non-ideal location of 2nd Street between Adams and Baker, which is very congested with traffic. You'll have 18 new FTEs, many of which will be firefighters and some medical capacity, whether EMT or paramedic. Of those 18, there will be a few administrative positions, because currently the city handles the business side of the operations of HR, legal, and finance, and this new fire district will need to move in a direction to fill those roles through those additional hires. Big service level increase is going to be the fleet that the chief talked about. On average, you budget about $60,000 per physical year for maintenance. Right now, at the 6-month mark, we're at about $105,000, because our fleet has gotten to the age and depleted so much that it just costs that much more to maintain and keep vehicles on the road. One of our engines, engine 15, currently can't pass the pump test and is sidelined as a training-only unit. So we're down an engine as it stands. We also have an ambulance apparatus that's getting a new top end put in it, because it blew the spark plugs out because it has too many miles on it. So lots of fleet needs. And then you talk about the seismic upgrade that the city couldn't fund a number of years ago, when we needed to come up with about $1.5 million to the $2.5 million grant opportunity to seismic retrofit that 1986 fire station. This new fire district would have capacity budgetarily if the newly elected board decided to do that, and that grant opportunity was still there. In the future, they could opt to retrofit for the big one, as well as these new substations would be seismic built as well.
Okay, so I feel like that's a good answer on your first question about will we increase firefighters? Yes. We'll increase response times? Yes. We'll increase our number of substations, and we'll have fleet improvements. I hope everybody has had an opportunity to review the bottom portion. I think if we're going to hopefully now, in a moment, take a dive into where committee members really see the need to allocate those funds. I do want to come back and make sure Councilor Menke has a chance to ask her question, because my feeling is once we start actually talking about that fund allocation, the discussion might be a little bit more robust. But Councilor Menke, do you want to restate your question?
Well, in order to vote on this, even if you're a pro, it's a fairly complex process. As I understand it, there are 3 questions that have to be answered.
For the rural board, for the rural resident, there is 3. So the rural resident would be voting on dissolving their current rural fire district, and then voting for the new McMinnville fire district that we're trying to pass in May, as well as the board positions. For the city voter, they're going to vote to form a new fire district and vote for the board positions. But where I think your confusion lies, Councilor Menke, is if the rural board or the rural resident failed to dissolve their fire district, their current rural fire district, then the new fire district doesn't get formed at all, because all 3 have to pass. Even though the city voter doesn't vote on dissolving the rural district, that still has to pass for the new district to form.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of confusion with the rural fire boards. being different people from the people that will ultimately go on the district.
Yeah, so when the new district is formed, pending the May election, at that same time in May will be an at-large for a 5-member board, and the top 5 vote getters will form that board, and then that board will convene and dictate who will serve the 3 4-year initial terms and who will serve the initial 2-year terms. After that, it'll operate like our council seats, where you have an election every 4 years, and you serve 4-year terms, and so there's oscillating terms, so there's continuity and institutional knowledge going forward for that fire district. But we as city councilors will have no say in that fire district unless you opt to run for a fire board seat and get elected. And the rural fire board will have no say in that new fire district unless they opt to run for a new fire district board seat. And that'll be through a standard election process, just like we all got elected here.
Yeah, so thank you for underlining that point. The creation of the fire district is the creation of a new governing body that is not held under the city, the county, or rural fire. It is its own independent governing body. Okay, at the bottom of your packet, there's a number of options that have been suggested. They go from investing in deferred facility maintenance, funding capital vehicles, equipment, and technology replacement, making lump sum payments to the PERS retirement system, maintaining current service levels, looking at some of the ad packages that were previously before us in Budget Committee, creating a facility reserve, creating facility maintenance reserve, and creating vehicle and equipment replacement reserve. And again, these are unrestricted funds that will be coming into the city. And so those are some of the things that are proposed. There's quite a bit expanded on under each of those headers, and this is, all of this information is available on the city website, on the packet that was prepared for this evening's meeting. And I'm hoping with that, maybe we can take a slightly bigger bite of the sandwich.
So, Mayor, just for clarity, the Finance Director Cuellar does have a presentation to set up that conversation. So if you're done with JL and the polling discussion, we would invite Finance Director Cuellar to introduce that topic and walk you through a handful of slides.
Oh, well, thank you. I was out of step with the steps this evening. Thank you. We'll get right to that. Counselor?
I just want to kind of put a note here. In looking at the date in which this survey was done, one concern that I have is it appears to me that the survey was done really tight to the window in which the city services fee appeared on people's water and light bill. And so it may not be wholly accurate to the sentiment of how people are feeling after seeing that on their bill. So just kind of to bring that kind of to the surface of our knowledge and as we move forward in thinking through this process.
Thank you. And Committee Member Maxfield.
I'm not sure if I should wait till after Jennifer presents. I was just going to comment on, I think it's interesting that the survey results show that so many people are very satisfied or pretty satisfied with the city. I think that's very encouraging, and that then when we asked what their priorities were, how they wanted to spend the money, they said to maintain the city's existing staffing, programs, and services in the library, parks and recreation, police, public works, and administration. So clearly people are happy and they want to keep it where we're at with those. I think maybe there's a misunderstanding in how important we start to maintain our equipment and buildings. I think maybe there's, if we don't prioritize fixing the deferred maintenance, people might not understand that our current programs and services will go down. And so those are, I feel like they're tied. They're not really different questions. And so when looking at at the end of the packet, when we're discussing it, I think we prioritize the ones that we can explain how they will affect our current services and programs. And if we can connect it, then we can help people understand how we can keep everyone so happy with our city.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Finance Director Cuellar, the time is yours.
Well, good evening, everyone. Let's see, I think I've got the share screen right, so I will jump right in here. So we were at the portion of the conversation talking about the taxing authority and what we want to do, what we're thinking about doing with the effectively $1.50 in new taxing resources that would become available to the city should the ballot measure pass. So why am I not forwarding? There we go. So a couple of key questions on that come up and are in the packet. And this portion starts on page 27 of the packet if people are looking for it. So we're wanting to look at what should the city spend these unrestricted resources on and how should we prioritize them? And how much should the city levy of that approximate $1.50 in property taxes that has historically supported the fire department? And after seeing the results from the polling data and what community members were saying there, it really does sound like it would be good to get any initial thoughts from members of the budget committee about what a community engagement strategy might look like and what would be important to you that you think would be effective as we build that out. So, as Mayor Drabkin outlined, there are a number of options. I've essentially put together 8, and then maybe this numbering will help us track what people are liking particularly much or not so much. So the under levy, that's kind of the technical term of not fully levying the entire $5.02 of the city's permanent rate. And so I just did some math, and this data is a year old, but the average single family taxable value was $225,000 here in McMinnville. And that equated to just over $1,100 in property taxes. So looking at it in chunks of thirds, and for 50 cents, under levying would give back approximately $113 to a property taxpayer. If we under levied $1, the $1.50, that's $2.26. Or if we under levied the entire amount and didn't levy any in the first or in subsequent years, that would be running around $340 per household. Let's see. The next is, this is a changed order from the staff report, also based on the polling data, that what people seem to be really interested in is that we are maintaining current service levels. So current service levels, the hope is that with the city services charge, that will allow us to keep our current staffing and programmatic levels. It would allow us to make our annual incremental advancement in rebuilding our reserve funds. And it also should help us be able to do basic capital replacement and some facilities maintenance within that. But we're at a stage in the budget process where I just don't know for sure the answer to the question whether we would be there if we under levied the entire $1.50. But we should have insights into that in early February. So the timing of these conversations just really couldn't be better. Then there were some core service packages that we had hoped to be able to include for the current fiscal year. And so with that as a starting point, that's about $1.3 million worth of the entire package. So there were a number of things, including centralizing park or facilities and fleet maintenance, and getting park maintenance's core services level up from below base to base. But these are things that we'll see whether we can fit into the budget without the $1.50, but we likely would need additional resources to move forward on those kinds of things. We could invest in deferred facilities maintenance. I won't go into the details. You guys can read it. It's giving back information that we've had in hand since 2019 about the status of the facilities and what we need, what it would take to keep our buildings in the workable status that they should be. Oh, and actually, let me call out the average amount, just doing that each year, is about 67 cents of tax, of the property tax millage rate. And so that's a pretty large number. So just to have a sense of the scale of that. Then funding capital replacement, including technology and, our rolling stock, big equipment. And so in the general fund, this can easily be $350,000 to $550,000 a year that frequently we're just unable to move forward with. And then technology can be a really volatile number in terms of how large it needs to be for those big end-of-life reinvestments in new technology that come along. Another option is, while the program that the state had going a couple of years ago that you could get 25 cents on the dollar, they would match your investment to PERS. That program is not available, but they have expanded communities' abilities to make lump sum payments into the system. And so there is, it looks like that would probably be a financial winner for us. But if that's something that people are interested in considering, I would recommend that we run an actuarial evaluation on 2-3 scenarios, which would cost less than $2,000, work with PERS to really refine what the savings might look like if that was something we wanted to consider. Then creating a facility reserve.
One second, if you don't mind, Jennifer. We have a question from Councilor Peralta.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
What's
okay.
up?
I just had a question about the PERS. Do you know, there's a certain year, and I think before the actuarial changes, it was like 2035. It may be different now, but when the PERS sort of slips off the books as a major factor in our budget, do you offhand know roughly what that date is?
Well, it starts, let's see, I pulled up the PERS. I'm sliding this over. Can you guys see this spreadsheet now on top of the slides? I'm just not sure what the share screen is showing. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
So you can see, I think this is what you're asking about, Councilor Peralta. This seems to be the high point year, the biennium 33 to 35. And then the actuarial studies are showing us that that's going to be the peak, and then it'll start drifting, coming back down. Does that answer your question?
That was my question. It looks worse than I remembered. Thank you.
Okay, sure. And then this is just using PERS as standard actuarial, assumptions. The green is what without a new side account, and projected costs in purple are what, if we kicked in, I think this was $1.6 million, this is how much savings over time we would get. But anyways, that would be the kind of thing I'd recommend we dig into if that's of interest to people. So
Mayor,
we good
Yes.
on PERS?
before we go off of PERS,
Yes.
Was that
graph you just showed us, the city of McMinnville's liability,
Yes, yeah.
would it be possible to have that available to us?
Sure, I can include this. I think Claudia has the slide deck, so that'll go up. And I can add this, work with Claudia to add it to the public record. It's just, these are, the projections are, not terribly scientific, but it gives you a sense.
Thank you.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. If you'll go on.
Sure. So creating a facility reserve. So in my mind, this would be if we know we've got projects for general fund items in the same way that we have the strategy for wastewater, we could start saving up to help offset bond measure costs or debt we would need to undertake to do big building projects. So that's the concept here. And then the last I lumped together, we could consider creating reserves for facility maintenance or equipment replacement, that kind of thing. But that strategy really isn't an effective one unless it's we have a sustained ability to tuck away dollars as well as do the annual outlays. So just something to think about in terms of effectiveness. So I've put these all in a grid, so I don't know if this would be helpful to use in terms of the conversation of trying to get a sense of where people stand in the budget committee in terms of priorities. And then there are 2 more slides in the deck which might be helpful for the conversation. I'll just show you what they are. The question about how much of the levy, the $1.50, I'm talking about that after prioritizing probably is the nice sequencing to do. And then the last is some discussion on community engagement. If we get there tonight, maybe that would be a topic for next Tuesday, or if we need, we can carry this into a third evening's conversation. So that's what I've got for folks. Let me know what you think would be most effective for having the conversation. I can take off the shared screen. We can leave this summary up. Just feelings from the room.
I think we can take that down so that we can see everybody on the Zoom. We do have the similar information in our packet.
Great.
Great. Thank you. Councilor Peralta, did you want to open the conversation?
Yeah, with a few questions. So if this were to be put on the May ballot and passes, what would be the implementation date in terms of when the tax would take effect?
So,
Yeah, July 1.
That would be the new rate for the fire district. And then how do we set the new rate for the city?
So what we're looking for from this series of conversations is the budget committee's recommendation on how much, if any, of that $1.50 to build into the base budget that we present to the budget committee in May. And just in terms of logistics, because the election happens the night before your first budget committee meeting, we're preparing 2 budgets, one with the fire department and one without the fire department. And Rich is preparing 2 budgets. One is part of the city, one is a standalone district. And so the guidance we get from you over the next 2 or 3 evenings will be what we build into the initial proposed budget. And then the council and budget committee will do the traditional budget process based on the results of the election the day before.
thank
Does that
you.
help a little bit in terms of process? Thanks.
All right, wonderful, thank you. And to touch back on your public engagement piece, I do want to restate that we've had many public engagement sessions to date, both hosting and going out to the community. And then this evening is a part of our public engagement process as well. This was a specially called work session specifically with the idea of having this conversation openly and encouraging public engagement, and next Tuesday as well, and we'll be taking public comment before deliberations next Tuesday. Councillor Geary.
Yeah, a clarifying question to help facilitate the discussion for staff. Can you help me differentiate for selection purposes and how they are or aren't mutually exclusive in the context of investing the money between 2 and 3 on Jennifer's prioritization of slides? The difference being between maintain current service levels and core services add packages. Could you just help me differentiate between those two?
So, I don't know if I can help or hurt. I'll try not to do the latter. So, we use the core services tool to help categorize and prioritize the level of service that we're currently providing and the optimal levels of service that we could provide over time. That core services analysis became the basis for the ad packages that were built into the initial budget last year. We are preparing to present essentially a status quo budget as we move into our round 1 staff level work, informed again by the conversation and any decisions you make over the next couple of weeks. As Jennifer indicated, a lot of the numbers are unclear right now, as they are this time of year during any budget process. So we're not currently sure whether that base budget with or without any of the levy is going to have a real status quo impact or give us any capacity to move ahead on some of those potential ad packages. There is the possibility that without the levy, we may still be able to make some meaningful investments because we do have the city services charge online, and that will generate a full year of revenue in fiscal year 23-24. So we'll be doing our best to present you at the very least a status quo budget, as well as options for potential investments, again informed by this discussion. And as we move the next 3 months, the numbers just become more clear, and you'll have a full budget to consider in May, as you always do, unlike now where we're very early in the process and just trying to get the high-level concepts in place to help us build that budget.
Hurt. So I think, let me ask it in this way. The way I'm looking at those two, I think I get what you're saying too, but I'm going to ask again. The way I'm looking at those two is core service ad packages is looking at that list and if we come up with funds and we all agree, then that we would look at that list and reinvest in, or pick some of those and invest in those per how much money we have at the list we already have. Is that what that one's asking?
Yes, mostly. Now, what we've asked departments to do is to use those ad packages from last year as the base from which to consider ad packages. And so some of those ad packages may just be updated for current costs. Okay. Some maybe we've made progress, maybe needs have changed, and so the group of packages that you saw last year may not be identical to any packages you see in the coming year, but they should look familiar. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, that does. And so then in the context of maintain current service levels, we would roll into the next fiscal year more of what you were saying, status quo.
Yeah, without utilizing much or any of that additional levy capacity, it's more likely to be a status quo
Got it.
than a budget that includes new investments or increases in our core services.
So those two are almost either or?
Maybe, and again,
Okay.
it's a lot of the numbers evolve
Yeah.
in the next several months. We take a look at where we think our expenses are going to be now, but we refine those when we get to the budget time. Same for revenue. So maybe I'll turn it over to Jennifer for any additional perspective on that concept.
Do you have anything to add, Director Cuellar? If not, I'm going to go to Committee Member Ernst on Zoom with a question.
Thank you, Mayor. My question, I think, is similar to Zach's. It's kind of challenging to hear on Zoom. I think the people in the room, I don't know if other people on Zoom are having that issue at all, but so I couldn't really hear Jeff's responses. But I'm curious how the city services charge impacts the base levels of services that the city is able to provide, how that interacts with this. But also, I think also what Zach was asking, whether it's possible, because I think that the ideas that that Jennifer suggested and also that were in the packet, a lot of those seem like really good ideas. Is it possible to do, are they all just individual though? Like, could we do them all? Like, I wasn't clear from the packet how it would be possible to put those together to make the best decision.
I can try to take this. Essentially, essentially, and what I think the packet tries to convey is that we have an overall amount of taxing authority, generally speaking, and we receive a certain amount of property tax with which to operate our city budget. Part of that currently goes to supporting fire. So if the fire district passes, then what we as a city are proposing is that we don't give up that taxing authority so that we can use those funds elsewhere. And each of these things has a certain amount of cost associated. So I suppose one could say, well, let's put nominal amounts into a variety of things, but I don't believe that would create the impact that the city is looking to make to actually get ahead of some of our financial pitfalls. Is that clarifying at all?
Well, kind of, because I agree that I think and as Meredith mentioned too, if we are operating as for the current budget below base, and people like the services as they are, but they might not realize that we're operating below base. And so to get back to even base level is going to take more of an investment than it sounds like was one of the proposals, but then also investing in the maintenance that hasn't been kept up and that is necessary now. It seems like we should be doing multiple of what Jennifer suggested. Yeah, and so I'm just wondering how, are they all, we can't really select all those boxes. We can't do all of those things with the $1.50.
Correct. So let's dig into
that's what I was curious about, is how they could work together.
Great. So I'm going to tee off the conversation here on how they might work together. And so, we did see this some satisfaction. We saw satisfaction with city services, which is wonderful. And then also we know that, for instance, at the library, they don't have offices. They almost have stacks of books, creating offices behind the scenes. Many of our facilities are beyond falling apart. In fact, our recent presentation on our public works facility, it's almost not a building. In fact, we have multiple almost not buildings at this point. Unfortunately, we have kind of decades of deferred facility maintenance. And so I will jump in by saying that I see two things that I think the city should be investing in with these dollars. One is this upgrade to our core services. I don't think that it's a standard that's acceptable to be operating at a below base level. To me, that says it's something we're not doing well, and if we're not doing it well, it really calls into question why we're doing it. Beyond that, though, I think the ad packages are warranted. While we hear that people are satisfied, we also hear and see a lot of dissatisfaction within the community. We don't have the operating budget to keep our parks clean to the level level that we want to, for instance. And beyond that, also funding that comes for this is, or funding from these core services is also public safety. And that is an issue we hear a lot about, and we hear about it frequently. And so I think looking at our core services packages and our ad packages, to your point, as one or both, but in my preference as an ad packages, is a wise use of this money if we're granted or if we pursue keeping it. And I think that that's wise for us at this point. The other thing, which I just touched on, is the deferred facility maintenance. So we are at a point where we are spending more money. We are throwing money away, chasing facility fixes, as opposed to investing in facility improvements. And that goes from everything from the roof that has to be tarped on the swimming pool that's falling down, to the double-wide trailers for our Public Works Department that were meant to be temporary 20 years ago. To although I realize this one would come out of play, but to our fire station, which doesn't meet code. So we have tremendous facility needs, and I think it is wasteful of the city to continually spend money on not fully fixing things. And I understand we don't have in our budget right now the ability to really do those fixes. So for me, keeping some of that money focused on public safety, looking at our ad packages and bringing our core services up to a base level, and deferred facility maintenance are really where I would like to see those dollars go. And I understand it's a group decision, but that is where I would put those dollars. And I think that is also reflective of what we hear from the community on a regular basis. Councillor Geary, and then Committee Member Herman Ferry.
Well said. I think ours would be in alignment if I was to put them in numbers on the prioritization of options. I kind of had 4 and 8 at the top, which would be the deferred facility maintenance and create reserves facility maintenance and or capital replacement, as well as number 3. And I would only add perspective from the future of the MacPac project in that facility that we're working towards, and with the council's blessing to this date on every step we've taken, we're looking at a major investment in correcting some of those facilities, and to add a dollar value to that, because that's germane to this conversation, that recommendation for the new aquatic center and community center joint facility had an additional operating cost of about $500,000, $477,000 would be an additional operating cost to that new facility. So I look at that as important money to keep in my mind for future planning as an addition to this prioritization of options. So
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Annual carrying cost of the new rec facility, you're saying is about $500,000?
Will you lean into your mic and ask the question again? Thank you.
I'm sorry, Councilor Geary, you said that the additional staffing and going forward cost on a new facility would be $500,000 per the MacPac?
The figures they had in the report from that we approved from OPSIS that had the conceptual plan we had, as well as a good assumption, operating assumption for an operating budget, which would be everything from the toilet paper rolls in the bathroom stalls to administration of the facility and a replacement plan. So everything all in total. They combined our current budgets for the community center and the aquatic center, and they compared that with what they projected for the new facility that would join those two facilities' uses. And assuming a recovery rate of 76%, so a fee structure for admission and operations and programming at a recovery rate of 76%, it would be an additional $477,000 to the city budget to operate that facility. So where that actually ends up, is all to be discussed or whatever, but to me, that's the number I'm keeping in my head for planning purposes for if we open that and be good fiscal stewards of that facility, that's what we would need to commit.
Thank you. Committee
Mayor?
Member Harmon Ferry.
I think I agree with you, Mayor Drabkin, about some of the priorities. I guess I'm trying to wrap my mind around, we have two tasks right now, right? Deciding how much of the $1.50 we're going to continue to levy.
Well, actually, we're not coming to a decision today. We're in a work session.
Work session, okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then also which priorities we hope to rise. And I'm wondering which order makes the most sense. Like, it's hard for me to know, I would say, yes, let's the priority 2, 3, and 4, or whatever it is, but I don't know what those total dollars are, so it doesn't make as much sense to me to know, yes.
It's difficult if you don't have it all.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
Victoria, are you hearing me better now than you did before?
Yes, thank you, Jeff.
All right, I've changed mics, and I apologize to everyone for having a bad mic. Let me answer a specific question that Member Ernst asked a few minutes ago. Right now, we're estimating that in next year's budget, the city service charge will generate about $2.3 million. So that's the new revenue for the full year. We're expecting to get about 1.1 million of that this year. So in answer to that question, we will endeavor to do whatever we can do to help the committee sort of work their way through this. If one suggestion I can make, and I'll ask Jennifer to weigh in on this before I promise that she'll do all this work, if there are something less than all 8 of those things on the list that sort of gravitate to seem to be higher priorities for the committee, we can spend some time between now and next week trying to make more clear what we think the budget impact of those would be for you. We did try to hit some high-level numbers in a couple of those things. For instance, the suite of ad packages last year was about $1.3 million. It probably won't be $1.3 million for next year, so we need to refine those numbers. But we can describe in more detail what those packages look like for you, if that's something that there seems to be some consensus around it. And likewise, I think we could further refine or maybe expand some of the information that we summarized for you tonight. Jennifer, does that make sense? Have I given you heartburn?
Well, I just, because we're in the process of just gathering all that information right now, it seems, I don't know, it's probably not a good phrase, a little bit like a fool's errand, because in 3 or 4 weeks, we'll have a much better idea. It's just, so for me, I think, I don't know if this is helpful for folks, but if people, if we could get guidance in terms of sort of what are the top 2 or 3 things that really resonate as a group with the budget committee as the most important to be prioritizing in our, budget option number 2, if the with the fire district, the ballot measure has passed, and so we've got additional potential resources available to us. What you'd like to see in the budget, combined with how much, if any, you'd like to levy next fiscal year, we can put those things together and then explain to you either ahead of putting together the entire budget or certainly as part of the budget document, you would see how we were able to make put those 2 pieces of the puzzle together for the budget that you have in hand. And that wasn't very articulate.
So, well, let me first, I don't think I was very clear, Jennifer. I wasn't asking for us to build detailed budgets about what those ad packages might look like next year, but we already told you that it was about 1.3 million, but we described it with about 7 words. I mean, there's 2 pages of descriptions that tell you exactly what those ad packages were and what the change in base in service provision would be. So that's information we already have. We would recreate that for you. So we wouldn't build a new budget. I mean, we might, throw an inflationary number on it or something like that. But I'm not looking for us to sort of jumpstart, do the budget before the budget's done. So I apologize for that, Jennifer.
No, sure. Yeah, I can make that available as well. Just the list that was in the budget document last year maybe just having that would be helpful, and I can add that to the additional little pieces on PERS that I'm going to provide.
I
Does
saw
that-
at least a few heads nodding, so I think that'd be useful information.
Okay,
Thank you.
cool.
Great, thank you. And we're going to go to Council President Garvin and then Councilor Chenoweth.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council and the Budget Committee, I would just like to refer you to the slide deck from Nelson Research this evening. And slide 10 specifically kind of highlights how we've moved from 66% in our April polling to 60%, and then with the city retaining the taxing authority down to 47.6. When you move over to slide 11, and it talks about waiting a year, waiting 3 years with our general implementation over 3 years, or immediate use. When we go to immediate use, we're down to 35.5%. And so I think utilizing any of this taxing authority immediately really puts all of the taxing authority freeing up in jeopardy, and that we need to be cognizant of what this polling data is saying. And we can have the discussion on what we would like to spend money on, but the other slide, slide 13, that talks about citizens would like to engage us for that, jumps that back up to 53.7. And meetings with the chief and Nelson Research on that initial polling, and before we knew that was going to come back in the mid-60s. You know, I recall from memory that Nelson Research said if we're anywhere in the mid-40s, that it's worthwhile to go forward with a ballot measure, and that's why we're here today. And so I think if we're talking about doing anything that data is representing is going to put us anywhere below that mid-40s, it's short-sighted, and we're not going to have the opportunity to really recognize what that $1.50 could do for our citizens, because we're putting it in jeopardy completely by trying to utilize it this July 1. Our city service fee that generates $2.3 million, if you convert that over to dollars per thousand, that equates to about 72 cents per thousand that you're paying. If you look at our 502 and how that generates $16,250,000, you back that down to 2.3 million, and it equates to about 72 cents. So that's what the taxpayers currently getting levied this upcoming fiscal year, that they weren't getting levied in the current fiscal year until implementation here this January. And so I think first and foremost, it's important that all of us are cognizant of the burden that puts on some of our citizens' budgets, especially those on fixed incomes, which through the data also represents our likely 4-for-4 voters. And so I don't want us to get ahead of our skis per se and put the district as a whole in jeopardy because we want to get too aggressive with our service levels we'd like to provide in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Chenoweth?
That tees me up nicely. Thank you. So I just did some quick checking online to see how many households are in McMinnville. There's 12,900 households. If I read this data correctly, we're looking at the $2 or the $1.50 taxing authority giving us about 4.8 million. We're getting 2.3 million from the city services fee. That's a net increase of 7.1 million that the residents, it's actually more than that because they're getting the full $2, but I didn't calculate it that. That translates out to $550.40 per household that we're going to be assessing to our citizens. I have very deep concerns about what that looks like and how that's going to play out in the voting data. And as I said, in looking at the numbers that we just got on our polling data, excuse me, that polling data came out before people saw the city services fee. So I don't think that's going to be a complete representation of what we're dealing with as of today. So I'm going to throw out an out-of-the-box idea that I've been toying with for quite a while as a solution to all this that I think might generate goodwill to the citizens of McMinnville. It might ensure that this thing gets passed, and it might free up the entire $1.50 that you are hoping to spend today. And that would be to put on the ballot a agreement that if this thing passes, we'll rescind the city services fee. That way we are, instead of just hitting them with 7.1 million in new, the 4.8 that would be available to us would be there. We've delivered a very solid message that we've heard the concerns and felt the pain that people are feeling and the amount of money that they're having to see in increases. I think it's a win-win for all of us. In terms of spending, I think it's a win-win for all of us, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Counselor. I do want to be a little careful of back of the napkin math, especially with your quick Google search. For instance, it's not actually reflective of how the city service charge is administered. And so I just want to be conscientious of not putting false data into the public conversation, especially number-specific data like you did. So I just want to be very cautious of that. And I hear the idea, and thank you for bringing the point, and I hope you can hear my
It was a generalization, and I understand that because I can't do exact data.
Right, but for instance, there are 17,500 water customers, not 12,900. You base that on household, so I'm just saying that the quick math, one of the great things that we get to do here in government is take our, sometimes for many people, frustrating long time, but that is for that process, and that is so that we are able to present this very accurate financial data out. So that's my concern, is that I don't want the numbers you presented to be taken as fact, because I don't believe that they're factual, without any offense to you or implication that there was malintent.
You're probably talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 per household that's going to be faced by our residents, and particularly if they own a house, it's going to be more than that. And I think that we need to be cognizant of how this is coming on to our citizens, particularly those in fixed incomes.
Thank you, sir. And I did note you said that you want to tax today, and I don't think, other than Council President Garvin, we've talked much about implementation timelines yet. So I just also want to put that out into the sphere. Okay, wonderful. And Councilor Menke.
I do want to talk about implementation guidelines. I really feel like we can't really discuss picking and choosing things unless we kind of think over the timeline involved. And quite honestly, initially I really wanted it to happen all at once, but having gone to a number of these sessions and listened to the people, I do not think that's going to work. Personally, I like a 3-year probably phase in. 4 might be better, not doing anything the first year and then 50 cents over the next 3 years, but I just don't see it passing without some give on, a little more give than what we've currently come up with. So,
Thank you. I'm going to go Councilor Geary and then Committee Member Harmon Ferry. Did I not get you? I got a nod from you. No, I misunderstood the nod. Committee Member.
Point of clarification, and I may be stupid on this, I'm admitting up front. The fire calls for $2 per thousand, right? And right now we're doing $1.50. So it is already a 50% increase, isn't it?
So the fire service would get the equivalent of a $2 levy to support fire and EMS.
Right, but so.
I can help you out with that, Debbie.
Thank you.
So currently, out of the 502 that the city levies annually through our budget process, $1.50 of that is utilized for fire service. This new fire district that's going to be formed will have a permanent tax rate of $2 per thousand.
Right,
So
but
yes,
to a household then, it's a 50 cent, no.
So
If we keep the 150, it's $2.
just a second, let me finish. July 1, if the city of McMinnville chooses not to levy any of that current $1.50, so we adopt our budget with a $3.52 permanent tax rate, the voter July 1 will see a 50-cent increase overall on their tax bill because they're going to have an additional 50 cents for that fire service. That new tax rate is a full $2, so as we ramp up this $1.50 and bring it back online from $3.52 to $5.02, the McMinnville resident taxpayer will eventually be paying an additional $2 for fire service because it's a whole new governing body at $2 per thousand.
Thank you. I was just clarifying when Kelly said do nothing this year. It doesn't have no impact on the citizen this year. It would still be.
Yeah, on a $300,000 tax assessed home, they'd be paying an additional about $150 a year and $12.50 per month. And that's assessed value, not market value. So that is something very, very different. I mean, a $600,000 home in McMinnville could, of real market value, today's dollars, could have a tax assessed value of about $270,000. And that's due to how the property taxes are capped at 3% annual growth from Measure 47 from Bill Sizemore in 1996. So when that home is built in 05 and it's brought online at $220,000, it is only ever going to grow at 3% per year unless there's a major remodel and it gets its property taxes reevaluated, or it's demolished and rebuilt.
Thank you. And Committee Member Mason.
Just a question for clarification. Is the $1.50, does it have any use it or lose it requirement? Does it have any sunset if it's not utilized for a certain duration? So that ceiling.
I could jump in on that one.
Thank you. Finance Director Cuellar.
Yeah, so as a part of the Budget Committee's remit is you will be adopting or proposing the budget to the community and also levying a dollar amount of the permanent rate as well as any bonds that we need to cover. So it's an annual commitment. So you're not permanent rate, they really do mean permanent. You can't change that $5.02, but you can choose to under levy, and that's part of the annual budget process. So was that your question?
Yes, my question was, if you choose to under levy, it doesn't bring the ceiling down. The 502 stays 502.
Correct, but the next tax year, the assessor will only be levying, if, as Adam said, $3.52 as opposed to $5.02 within the city limits for McMinnville.
Jennifer, as a point of clarity for Jerry, what I heard too was that he wanted to know if you under levy for a certain amount of years, will that ceiling ever be at risk of coming down? That permanent tax rate that was set by Measure 5 is always going to be that permanent tax rate.
Correct. We're not risking losing it later. I suppose state laws could change, but
Sure.
Yeah.
Additional comments? Committee members, anybody on Zoom? Councilor Peralta?
I just have a few comments. Regarding the city services charge, at least from what I've seen in the community, there's a lot of false statements, probably more false statements about the cost of the charge than there are accurate statements. So one way of taking down the temperature of the public on those charges is actually making sure when you hear people making false statements about them, like this is doubling your sewer fee, not that it costs $12 a month maximum, those kinds of things can really help take down that temperature, just correcting the false information, which is pretty rampant in some circles. Regarding the $1.50 difference figure, I'm in agreement, I think, with Councilor Garvin. I think we need to pay attention to the polling that came back. I'm not sure, Kelly, that the polling supports a 4-year stretch. What I heard was a 1 year.
I'd like 3.
Well, what I heard was a year, basically, and a year with a significant amount of community engagement for what that money's going to go to, at least based on what the polling is. And I'm flexible.
Oh, okay.
It's not a year if it's 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah.
That's cool with me. As far as the utilization of the money, I can see myself getting behind, maybe a number higher than $3.50 even initially, just because the whole point of this for me is to get the city on a permanent, long-term, stable trajectory. I don't want to get this, it's not my intent in doing these things to significantly increase the service level broad-based. I'm much more interested in seeing the service level increase for park maintenance, for park building. It would be nice. I mean, I don't know if this is realistic, but I mean, I've heard jurisdictions that talk about budgeting to like 97, 98% of revenue rather than 100% of revenue so that they start setting aside money for long-term investment. I like the idea of doing set-asides for capital investment. I'm not sure if I like the idea of setting aside the total value of that capital investment because I'm hoping that we can get other money coming in from the outside to leverage. So I think where I'm at is I would prefer to keep something closer to the current service level, perhaps increasing parks, perhaps doing set-asides for long-term capital investment, but mostly taking that process slow after because we have to get the fire district passed. That's the priority. And then anything that we do above that is gravy, in my opinion, and I think it's supported. It will be supported by the community if we basically follow the steps that the polling suggests, which is take our time, invest in core services, and deal with the kind of capital investment that people don't like to think about, which is economics.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, if you're still on the call, do you have the chart you shared with us that showed the most successful implementation timeline? And you had four bar graphs, and you showed us there were two that were clearly unpopular and two that were more popular.
Sure.
Slide 11.
And I wanted to, I think there was some misinterpretation of the data early on. Let me get my screen share going. So I want to go back and address something that I heard because I don't, the situation wasn't as dire as was presented, and I don't want to leave you with, bad impressions. Here's the ballot comparison. It is, from April 22, we had 60% support. Initial support here on this January survey was at 60. With additional information on the cap space basically becoming free, and that the city was contemplating ways to exercise that taxing authority, your support dropped down to about 47%. I think what I wanted to drive home here is, that's just part of the equation. I think there was a gentleman, I think Mr. Hart, who said, there's this whole other piece out there, which is the services, the quality of life improvements, and all of that comes along with the merger of the fire district and what that allows to happen, including more personnel, quicker response times, potential substations, things like that. So, you've got this whole other piece out there that I think that you got to recognize that the community has already demonstrated they're going to support. What you're talking about, what you asked me to come back on, was to discuss this more likely, less likely. And this more likely, less likely scenario is we asked, given these various timelines, if the voter was more likely or less likely to support the measure if they knew that the city was either going to immediately re-exercise that authority, exercise it after 1 year, exercise it after 2 years, or exercise it over a period of time over the course of 3 years. And that was clearly the most, the combination that was the most powerful, that had the most consensus, was this option of potentially waiting up to a year, but then exercising the authority gradually over time as you took input and made determinations about priorities after listening to your residents. And that is reflected in that number right there, where you had some 54% that said that they would be more likely to support the measure if they knew there was a process for intaking citizen input on how that money should be spent. And probably that will impact timelines. So I hope that gives some clarity.
Thank you, Counselor Geary. No, you just make good eye contact. Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it. Counselor Peralta.
JL, while you're on, I had a couple of other questions.
Sure.
Can you hear me on Zoom? I think you can. Okay.
Yeah.
I have done a few ballot measures more statewide than local, and I've always been nervous about going forward with a ballot measure when you have approval below 50%, and feel a lot more confident when it's up in the 50s. But you're saying that 47% after some of the negative data is not a bad starting point for us, given the other levels of confidence that people have in city government and spending and so on?
No, I think 47 is terrible.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that gentleman misunderstood me at some point in the process, and so I wanted to be clear. I would have liked to see 10 points higher than that. But what I'm also saying is most of those people parked themselves in the undecided. They did not go into the opposition category in this particular survey. And you've got this whole other set of argumentation out there about the features and benefits of the merger, which we're not even discussing at this meeting. And the features and benefits of that merger were very, very powerful, and we uncovered those in the survey we did several months ago. So I don't know that this 47 number is a true number for where it stands, because we did not go through all the argumentation about the features and benefits of the merger in this survey. What it does tell you is that you've got some process and you have to account for the fact that there is a drop in support when people realize this is a true, in essence, $2 per thousand increase to them, because just you're taking the fire district out of the general fund, and they're not getting rebated that money. That you're looking how to use that general fund money, and this is a true $2. And so what I'm saying is you need to account for that. The numbers clearly indicate you need to account for that, and you need to have a thoughtful response. That is, we're going to take citizen input. We're not just going to go start re-exercising that authority on day one. We're going to hear what you have to say, and we're going to sequence out a plan over time to take your input and invest in the things you say are priorities.
Thank you, JL.
So Counselor Geary.
Follow up directly on that, and your answer provided some flavor to the question I'm about to ask, but could you provide us some of your professional wisdom and guidance on how you see that undecided block break when you move from polling to actual, okay, we're not in a hypothetical world anymore. Here's the rub, right? So can you comment a little bit about, what I would say is a high pool of undecided, and B, your experience on how that breaks when we move forward?
It is so contextual, and I think the city's response can really dictate how it breaks. And the reason I say that is if you move with some of these data points, which is you're thoughtful about the process and all that, and you combine it with a good campaign that demonstrates the features and the benefits and demonstrates a history of doing what you say you're going to do, I would tend to think you're going to have some success. And it's because of the what we uncovered really in those earlier 3 or 4 questions that are really the predicate for the survey, which are these background questions that people like being in McMinnville, clearly, and they have some confidence in that their leaders are doing a good job, and that the taxes are going to be spent how they want them to. So generally, my feeling is that you have a lot to do with how those undecideds will break. typically undecideds, I would say as a general rule, I think will tend to be more negative than positive. But I do think that it is well within your power to change that narrative.
Mayor, can I just add that, I mean, it sounds like the conversation around community engagement will continue into next week. And one of the things that we are able to do is we can bring Jake from Praxis into that conversation along with Noel to talk about some specific approaches for addressing some of these unknowns that I think JL and his work has really highlighted for you. So I think that JL did a nice job sort of setting the general stage for that, but that's one of the things that Praxis is doing for us, is helping us with that communications work. And so I would intend to bring the Praxis team and Noel to the table next week to more fully explore what the committee wants in terms of community engagement and how we can communicate that.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Chenoweth and then Councillor Menke. I think there are two themes that we're hearing repeatedly throughout the committee and council, though, which is one, that an implementation timeline of 1 to 3 years that's partnered with robust community engagement is the direction that it seems most people would like to head. Councillor Chenoweth.
I just have a crystal ball question to JL. On your chart, or maybe not crystal ball, maybe mind reading, but on your chart, page 11, I'm perplexed by how that played out. And I'm wondering if you could maybe, and maybe you can't, explain to me why the voters would have been more confident in a 1-year plan than a 2-year plan, and then far more confident in a 3-year plan. Like, we're going this way. I did that wrong. I mean, they seem to be less confident in a 2-year plan than they are in a 1-year plan, and I don't understand why that would be.
You know, that's one of the joys of doing what I do, is that the answers sometimes are not what you would think. And I enjoy that aspect, but it was nonetheless real on this survey. And if I could sort of divine what people were thinking, I think people want a rational, practical way to move forward, and waiting for 2 years and just doing nothing just didn't seem like a practical way to go about it for a critical mass of people. So I also noticed that. I did think it was a little surprising. I took note of it, but when you start to piece it all together, that 2 years is a long time to just sit on your hands. It seemed very reasonable to me that the wisdom of the voters was kind of what you saw, which is, take a year, run a process, and then gradually implement over time.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Menke, I think, is up next, and then we'll go over here to Councillor Geary. Is that you? And then Garvin, and then that's going to put us at the end of our scheduled time.
Okay, so
Mayor?
I guess I want to ask Jeff. Sorry.
Please go for it.
I think I was first.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. What concerns me is timeline and energy here between now and the May 15th or whatever budget session. And then are we going to be out there having group sessions with the public to come up with this by the budget season, or at least by the end of June? Well, depending on if it passes.
So my answer depends on what decision this group makes next week or the week after. I will tell you that if you decide that it's your preference that we build a base budget with zero of the levy, I'm not going to spend a lot of time asking people how to spend $0.
Well, yeah, okay, so you're saying then we will do it all in the next year.
Right. So I mean, I didn't mean that to.
But I know you were going to prepare 2 budgets, that's why I'm
Yeah,
asking.
I didn't want that to come off as flip, but the reality is that I think, and I think JL touched on this. I know we talked about it a little bit in our staff briefing this morning. The engagement doesn't have to happen in the next 2 weeks. We have to lay out a plausible idea for how we're going to engage the community in these conversations. And if this group wants us to implement that $1.50 over a 3-year time frame, then it's a 3-year public engagement process, and we map that out for you. So again, the conversations you have over the next meeting or two will really help us figure out, is that a 6-month community engagement plan? Is it a 2-year plan? Is it a 3-year plan? Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Thank you. Councilor Geary?
So for that, I think, yeah, my last thought was on that community engagement piece. 100% agree, and that they should help us shape that future. It's also evident to me that this is incredibly complex, wild stuff, and it's sort of like going through a grocery store with no price tags on anything, and it's like, yeah, I like all that stuff, and you get to the end, and then you got to rectify and cast lots. And so I think some all that to be said is we have to do some legwork to qualify and have a rational offering to have the community then provide us input. And not to say that, there are only things that we're only going to let them give us input on the things we want them to give input on. It's more of, we should do a bunch of legwork to create those offerings, to say, we've done a lot of research and reading and been through a lot of budget processes. Here's critical infrastructure needs. Here's critical things that we can actually make a dent in with, if we come up with a 3-year period and it's 50 cents a year. Here's the best use of those things, and here's a menu of options. Do you agree? Are we way off the mark? How are we? What are we not thinking of? And we can chase those down too if anything comes out of it. But I think having a good running head start, much like staff often gives us a good running head start and then responds to changes as we go through those, we should meet the community halfway with an offering. I mean, this is incredibly complex stuff, and I constantly am asking Adam how we're doing this, and are we in the right way, and, oh yeah, what's that $1.50 mean? So I think we have to keep a simple message and have the best chance to pass that.
Thank you. And Council President Garvin?
Yeah, follow-up for JL. First, thank you for clarifying my confusion on that, but another clarifying question for you is on slide 11, where it talks about wait 1 year or gradual implementation over 3 years. Is it saying wait 1 year with a full $1.50 implementation, or is it saying wait 1 year and then implement over 3 years? So at year 4, you have that full $1.50 back online.
I think there's a little bit of room for interpretation there. I wish I could give you exact clarity on that. I mean, the question was worded, do you wait 1 year before exercising your taxing authority? And then the other option was spread it out over time. I just think that there's a convenient marriage between the two. And it's that you run a process for, say, a year, and then you start to gradually implement, whether it takes 2 years or 3 years. I couldn't tell you precisely because of the data, but I do think that it does start to paint a picture for how that process should unfold.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to misrepresent your data.
Thank you. And I have 2 more committee members that would like to make comment before we close. Committee Member Maxfield.
Adam asked my question. Thank you.
Okay, Committee Member Cunningham.
Yeah, first I want to say I agree with a lot of what's been put out there right now, and I think speaking to kind of what just Adam was speaking about of whether it's 1 year, $1.50, or gradual over 3 years, I think that plays into what Zach was just talking about, is that we need to show the community, like, this is what you're getting in the first year. These are the buildings that we're repairing. These are the core services, extra police officers, whatever that might be. This is what you're getting in year 1. If we're going gradual, okay, now you're gonna get this. You're gonna get this. As it grows, we'll get to that $1.50 and we'll achieve a lot more. And yes, I guess the community will have their ability to give more input over the course of those 3 years to continue to direct those funds in the best way our community views it. But one of the things that I'd want to say here is I think that just on slide 1 alone is that what the community is directing us to do is to do more. Is not to stay status quo and do what we have been trying to get away with doing for potentially decades. It has asked us, we understand that there are deficits within our community, there's deficits within the services, and we are asking that if you're going to ask this money from us, then we ask that you use it wisely and that you offer more than we are currently getting. And so I think that it's really important to look at all of the data, just like Zach spoke to, of just saying, we really do need to look at this from a lot of different ways, but then to take that and to broadcast it as widely as possible and using every voice that we can to broadcast that so that our constituency understands what it is that they're going to get out of this. Because I think looking at the numbers from the slide before, if you immediately go to city would retain taxing authority and that unknown number going up to 21.2, that's just, they don't know what they're going to get. And that's what we need to address.
Absolutely. Thank you. We did have one request for public comment. It is 8:01. If you'd like to come use a mic at the end, state your name and address for the record. We will take this one public comment before we close. Thank you.
Thank you. George Humley, 225 Northwest Ash Street. And just real quick question, doesn't have to go long, but I just want to try to keep this on the front burner. Where we are with the task force dealing with the homeless?
Oh, okay. Well, so this is a work session just on our fire district. I will be I will be responding at our next regularly scheduled council meeting.
So Tuesday night I can come and maybe ask again?
Tuesday night I'll be making a statement, so you won't have to ask anything
Got
at
it.
all.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all for your time this evening. Thank you, everybody that came this evening. We look forward to continuing this process, and have a good evening. Meeting is adjourned.